My earliest memories are of the hum of our family's small manufacturing shop and the scent of sawdust that clung to my father's shirts. The business, Malik and Sons Woodworks, wasn't glamorous, but it was the heart of our family. My father had started it from scratch after his own father died, building everything with his hands and his faith that honest work would keep us standing. From the time I was old enough to carry a broom, I worked beside him. I swept the floors, polished finished furniture, and listened to his soft lessons about patience and precision. "Wood tells you what it wants to be," he used to say. "Your job is to listen." I loved that. I loved how he spoke about his craft as if it were alive. My brother Mark, though, was different. Mark was 2 years older, sharper around the edges, charming in a way that drew people in. Where I stayed in the workshop, he stayed in the world, out with friends, networking, showing off his easy smile. My parents often laughed about how different we were, one child with calloused hands, the other with polished shoes. Still, my mother would often say, "You'll balance each other out someday." But as we grew, that balance never came. When Father began expanding the business, I was his right hand. I learned accounting, supplier management, and customer service. He relied on me, not because I was the smartest, but because I was there. Mark dropped by once in a while, always full of ideas about marketing and modernizing the image, though he rarely followed through. Yet somehow, people outside the family believed he was destined to take over. Mark had the gift of confidence, and Father, though occasionally frustrated with him, never truly challenged that image. "He's just finding his path," he'd say whenever Mark disappeared for weeks or asked for money to invest in ventures that never lasted. Sometimes I wondered if Father was afraid of pushing him away. Our home, a 2-story house with peeling paint and blooming jasmine by the gate, was another part of our inheritance, not in the financial sense, but in spirit. Every Sunday, our family gathered in the garden for tea. Father would talk about business plans, Mother would fuss over the snacks, and Mark would breeze in late, acting as though the world had waited for him. I didn't mind. I had learned to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of being steady, invisible even. While things ran smoothly around me, still small moments stung. When relatives visited, they'd ask Mark about his future plans for the company. When Father introduced us to clients, he'd proudly say, "These are my sons, Mark and Ion, the future of Malik and Sons." Mark always shook hands first. I stayed in the background, smiling, pretending I didn't notice the imbalance, but Father did notice. Sometimes, after a long day, he would place a hand on my shoulder and say, "You remind me of my father." Quiet strength. Those were the words I held on to whenever the unfairness pinched at me. Years passed. The business grew slowly but steadily. One managed suppliers, balanced the books, repaired machines, and earned the respect of our employees. They called me Boss Ion even before I was officially one. Mark, meanwhile, floated from one short-lived project to another, car dealerships, tech startups, trading ventures, always chasing the next big thing. By the time our father's hair turned silver, I had become the silent backbone of everything he'd built. But he never declared an heir. He never said who would own what. Perhaps he thought time would decide, or perhaps he believed his sons would find a way to share it all. I didn't yet know it, but that unspoken question, who does it all belong to, would become the spark that lit everything on fire. It happened faster than anyone expected. One evening, Father came home early from the workshop, his face pale and his breath short. He raved away my concern, blaming the heat and exhaustion, but later that night, I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, gripping his chest, eyes closed in pain. The next morning, he was in the hospital, the place he'd always avoided, saying it made him feel weak. For the first time, I saw him small. Machines hummed around him, and the strength that once filled every space he entered seemed to fade with every passing hour. The doctor's words were careful, but the meaning was clear. His heart was failing. Mark arrived in a rush, wearing sunglasses and a blazer, as if business meetings had kept him too busy to notice how quickly things had changed. He embraced Father with practiced warmth, saying, "You'll be fine, old man. You've still got years of bossing us around." Father smiled faintly, but his eyes found mine. And I saw what he couldn't say aloud, that he knew his time was slipping over the next few days. I stayed by his bedside, taking notes as he gave last-minute instructions about suppliers, client lists, and pending orders. He spoke more to me than anyone, his voice raspy but steady. "Keep the team together, Ayan. Don't let the shop fall apart. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, and he nodded. Closing his eyes with a soft sigh, Mark came and went, always on the phone, telling relatives he was handling everything. He'd post photos of himself at the hospital, smiling beside Father's bed, adding captions like "Family first, prayers up." It made my stomach twist, not because I doubted his love, but because I knew he needed to be seen loving, rather than simply doing it. When Father finally passed away, it was a quiet morning. The first call to prayer echoed faintly outside. I was there, holding his hand. His last breath came with a strange peace. As if he'd already made his final decisions in silence, I remember standing by the window afterward, unable to cry, while the world outside kept moving, rickshaws rattling past, vendors calling out, sunlight creeping across the floor. Everything felt cruelly ordinary. Mark arrived hours later, red-eyed but still composed. He wrapped his arm around my shoulder and said, "You did good, little brother. I'll take it from here." The words stung, though I said nothing. The next few days blurred into a haze of visitors, condolences, and rituals, our home filled with the scent of incense and murmured prayers. Mark stood front and center, greeting guests, shaking hands, giving instructions like a host at a grand event. People praised his strength, his leadership, his poise. I, meanwhile, handled the paperwork, the bills, and the endless quiet tasks no one noticed. The things Father used to do without complaint. At the funeral, Mark delivered a eulogy that made even the hardest men tear up. He spoke about legacy, unity, and carrying Father's dream forward. "I'll make sure his work continues," he declared proudly, and the crowd nodded approvingly. I felt a strange hollowness watching him claim a promise I'd already made in private. After the burial, relatives came to me quietly, offering gentle condolences and assumptions disguised as kindness. "Your brother will take care of the business now. That must be a relief for you." I smiled and said nothing, but that night, when everyone had gone, I sat alone in Father's empty chair in the workshop. The machines stood still, the air heavy with absence. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Keep it together, Ayan." I didn't know then that this was just the calm before the storm, that grief would soon give way to greed, and love would turn into something far colder. The weeks after Father's funeral felt like living in a fog, grief thick in the air, time moving unevenly. The house was too quiet, the workshop too still. Every corner seemed to hum with his memory. At first, Mark was unusually kind. He called often, checking on me and asking about the employees. "Don't overwork yourself," he'd say. "I'll handle the big stuff soon." I thought he meant the financial side of things, but soon I realized he meant everything. One morning, I arrived at the workshop and found Mark already there, dressed in crisp clothes, sleeves rolled up, barking instructions to the workers. He was standing where Father used to stand, in front of the main desk, as if he'd been there all along. "Morning," I said cautiously. He turned, flashing that familiar confident smile. "Morning, little brother." I figured it's time to take charge. We've got to keep things running, right? It might have sounded reasonable to anyone else, but I noticed subtle shifts, the way the workers looked to him now for orders, the way he used "we" but meant "I." By the end of the week, he had replaced the old signboard outside with a gleaming new one, Malik Brothers Industries. He called it a rebrand. The font was modern, the logo redesigned, but something about it felt like erasure. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "Come on, Ayan, it's just marketing. People associate me with the business. I've got the connections. You're great at the operations side. I'll handle the leadership." I wanted to laugh, but the ache in my chest stopped me. "Leadership? Mark, I've been running this place for years. You barely know half our suppliers." He sighed dramatically. "That's why we make a good team. You handle the numbers. I handle the name." But things escalated quickly. Within days, he began changing locks at the workshop for security reasons, introducing himself to clients as the new head of the company. He even started living in our family house, claiming it made sense since I preferred being closer to the factory. Employees who had known me since I was a teenager started avoiding my eyes, caught between loyalty and fear of losing their jobs. One evening, the senior foreman, old Bashir, pulled me aside and said quietly, "Sir, I don't understand. Did your father leave instructions about the business?" "The big brother. He says he's the owner now." The question cut deep because I didn't know the answer myself. Father had never told me or anyone what his will said. He'd mentioned once that it was updated and kept safely with the family lawyer, Mr. Yusuf, but after the funeral, Mark had taken over all communications. When I asked about the will, Mark waved it off. "Don't worry about that. I already spoke to Yusuf. Everything's being processed." Dad wanted the business to stay in capable hands. "Capable hands," I repeated, my jaw tightening. "Meaning yours?" He smiled thinly. "Come on, Ayan, you know this was always meant for me." Dad said so himself. I'm the eldest. The Malik name continues through me. That night I drove to the house, our house, only to find the locks changed. My old key didn't fit anymore. Through the gate I saw new curtains, new furniture, and Mark's car in the driveway like a signature on a stolen page. Something in me broke that night, not anger, not jealousy, but a sharp sense of betrayal. For years I had told myself that family was above business, that Father's silence about the inheritance meant trust. But now I saw how easily trust could be twisted into entitlement. I stood outside that locked gate for a long time before turning away, promising myself one thing: I would not fight with words or anger. I would wait, because deep down, I knew the truth had to exist somewhere, written, sealed, and waiting to be opened. 2 weeks after Mark changed the locks, I got a call from Mr. Yusuf, my father's longtime lawyer. His voice was calm, but carried a weight I couldn't quite name. "Ayan Beta, I think it's time we settled your father's estate. Can you and your brother come to my office tomorrow morning at 10? For a moment, I just sat there in silence, my heart thudding in my chest. The will, the truth. Everything I had been waiting for, or dreading, was finally coming. When I called Mark to confirm, he sounded almost smug. Yusuf finally called you too? Good, it's just a formality, Ayan. We both know how this will go." He laughed, light, careless, confident. I said nothing. The next morning, the lawyer's office felt colder than usual. The old building smelled faintly of paper, ink, and something old, like time itself. The walls were lined with files, and a portrait of my father hung behind the desk, framed neatly among certificates. Mark arrived late, as always, wearing a tailored suit and that same self-assured grin. He clapped my back. "Relax, little brother. You'll be taken care of. Maybe a share in the company or a bit of property. Dad wouldn't forget you." I wanted to remind him that it wasn't about being taken care of, but I let it go. Mr. Yusuf gestured for us to sit. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes flicked between us with quiet understanding. "Your father updated his will 6 months before his passing," he began, unfolding a sealed envelope with deliberate care. "He instructed that both of you be present for the reading." The room seemed to shrink around us as he opened the document. Mark leaned back, arms crossed, wearing the look of someone waiting to hear what he already believed. I sat still, hands clasped tightly in my lap. Yusuf cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Ahmed Malik, being of sound mind and health, do hereby declare this my final will and testament." His voice filled the room, calm, professional, yet heavy with finality. He went through small details first: bank accounts, charitable donations, personal belongings. Then came the line that made Mark straighten in his chair. "To my elder son, Mark Malik." Mark smirked, shooting me a quick glance. "I leave my collection of watches and my vintage car, with gratitude for the times we shared." The smile faltered, just slightly, then the lawyer continued. "To my younger son, Ayan Malik, I leave the Malik family home, the business known as Malik and Sons Woodworks, and all related assets, properties, and accounts. These shall be under his full ownership and management, with the understanding that he will continue to employ and support the long-standing workers who have helped build our name. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark blinked, stunned. Wait, what? That can't be right. Mr. Yusuf, unfazed, adjusted his glasses. Your father was very clear, Mark. He signed and witnessed this document personally. Mark's voice rose. He told me that the business would be mine. That's what he wanted. Yusuf shook his head gently. Your father did mention your enthusiasm, but he also told me, and I quote, Mark talks of legacy. Ayan lives it. For a moment, Mark just sat there, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find air. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, not from triumph, but from grief. The truth I had waited for had arrived, but it carried no joy, only the echo of my father's quiet wisdom. Mark finally stood, slamming his hand against the desk. This is unbelievable. You must have influenced him somehow. Yusuf's gaze hardened. Your father was nobody's fool. He made his choices with clear mind and full heart. He trusted the son who stayed. Mark stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall like thunder fading into distance. I sat there for a while longer, the will still open before me. My father's name at the bottom looked both like a blessing and a burden, and in that stillness, I finally understood what he had meant when he once told me. Legacy isn't given, Ayan, it's earned one day at a time. The silence in the lawyer's office hung heavy long after Mark's footsteps faded. I could still hear the faint echo of the door slamming shut, a sharp punctuation to years of unspoken rivalry. Mr. Yusuf leaned back in his chair, his face softening. Your father knew this day would be difficult, he said quietly. He wanted me to explain his reasoning in his words, not mine. He opened a second envelope and took out a handwritten letter, the edges slightly frayed. My father's handwriting, neat, deliberate, and familiar, filled the page. To my sons, it began. If you are hearing this, I am no longer here to speak for myself. I want you both to know that I loved you in equal measure, though not always in equal ways. My throat tightened. Mark, you were born with confidence, a leader's charm, a voice that could move people. I admired that. But I also watched you chase success without patience, seek ownership without labor. A family business cannot survive on name alone. It needs hands that know its weight. Mr. Yusuf paused, glancing at me before continuing. Ayan, you worked beside me from the start. You built, repaired, listened. I saw myself in your quiet diligence. But I never told you enough how much I depended on you, not just for the business, but for my peace of mind. Mark will find his path, as he always has. But this legacy, this home and workshop, must stay with the one who understands its soul. I trust you, Ayan, to protect what we built, not because you are my younger son, but because you are my truest heir. The words blurred through my tears. I had spent my whole life wanting my father to say those things out loud. And now that he finally had, it was through ink and paper. When the letter ended, Yusuf folded it carefully and handed it to me. He wanted you to have this. He wrote it himself, 2 months before he died. I held the paper as if it were glass, afraid it might crumble under the weight of what it carried. Just then, the door burst open. Mark again, his face red and eyes sharp with anger. You planned this, he spat. You and him. You turned him against me? Mark, listen, no. You think you deserve everything just because you were his little helper? Because you stayed here while I was trying to make something bigger of myself. He stepped closer, voice shaking with rage. You're nothing without me. You'll ruin this place in a year, watch. Mr. Yusuf stood up, his calm turning to steel. That's enough, Mark. Your father made his choice. There's no dispute here. The will is legally binding. Mark stared at the lawyer, then at me, his eyes full of disbelief, maybe even heartbreak. Then he laughed bitterly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. Fine, enjoy your empire, little brother. Let's see how far quiet loyalty takes you. He turned and walked out again, slower this time, like a man carrying something broken inside him. For a long while after he left, I stayed seated, unable to move. The world outside the window looked unchanged. Cars passing, sunlight glinting off rooftops, yet everything inside me had shifted. The truth was finally out. And it didn't feel like victory. It felt like release, heavy, bittersweet, complete. When I finally stood to leave, Yusuf said softly, "Your father was proud of you, Ayan. He told me once, the house will stand tall because of him." "And maybe someday even Mark will see that?" I nodded, clutching the letter to my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel overshadowed. I just felt seen. And though the war for the house and business had ended on paper, I knew the true test was only beginning, not to own what was left, but to honor it. The days after the will, reading felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, but heavy, like the calm that follows a storm that stripped everything bare. For the first time, the house was truly mine. Yet walking through its rooms didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. Father's chair sat untouched in the corner, his glasses still resting on the small side table. I found myself running my hand over the worn wood of his desk, feeling every groove carved by years of work and patience. I had inherited everything, the home, the business, the weight of a legacy, but I had also inherited the fracture between brothers. Mark didn't speak to me for weeks. Word around town was that he'd packed up and moved into an apartment near the city center. He told relatives I had taken everything, that I'd manipulated father somehow. I didn't correct him. Maybe I should have, but I couldn't bring myself to fight anymore. There's no winning against resentment. It only grows when you feed it. Instead, I poured myself into the workshop. The first morning I walked in as its rightful owner. The workers stood silently, waiting to see what kind of man I'd become now that the power was mine. I looked at them, men who had known me since I was a boy, and said, "Nothing changes. We keep doing what we've always done, honest work." They nodded, and something in the air loosened. Over the next months I made quiet changes. I upgraded the old machines, repainted the walls, brought in new apprentices. But I never changed the name. Despite Mark's rebranding, I restored the original sign, Malik and Sons Woodworks. Every time I looked at it, I felt my father's presence, steady, proud, and watching. One evening as I was locking up, I saw Mark standing outside the gate. He looked different, thinner, worn out, the confidence in his shoulders replaced by something quieter. We stood facing each other in awkward silence before he finally spoke. "You've done well." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. He glanced at the workshop behind me. "I thought you'd run it into the ground." "Guess I was wrong." "Father taught me well," I said softly. He sighed, eyes lowering to the ground. "I was angry, you know. Not just about the will, about everything. I thought being the eldest meant I was owed something. But I see now. He trusted you because you earned it." The words hung between us, an olive branch wrapped in humility. "Mark," I said carefully, "this place is big enough for both of us. You still have ideas, connections. If you're willing to work, really work, there's a place for you here." He looked at me, surprised. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who dreamed big before pride took over. He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe someday." "Not yet." Then he turned to leave, and I didn't stop him. Some reconciliations take time. Some must begin in silence. That night, I sat alone on the porch, Father's letter beside me. The house glowed softly under the porch light, jasmine blooming just like it had in his days. I thought about everything that had happened, the rivalry, the loss, the revelation, and realized something simple but profound. Legacy wasn't about who owned the house or the business. It was about who honored them. About who stayed, who listened, who built, and who kept the doors open for the next generation. I looked out at the workshop lights flickering in the distance and whispered into the quiet night, "I'll keep it together, Father. Just like I promised." And for the first time since his passing, I felt not grief, but peace, the kind that comes when truth finally settles where it belongs.